Hey everybody, we're Shayem and Chris, and this is Fan Team Radio. And we are back after a 2024 Spanish Grand Prix. Chris, what's up?
Yeah, first of the triple header. Going in, I'd say F1 is kind of back. I mean, we had a great race in Canada, and this might have not been as exciting. The wet weather didn't arrive, but it looks like we have a race on our hands. Maybe a little bit. The turn one action was quite the doozy with the, you know, Lando pulling a Verstappen and then pushing Max off the track. I thought actually that was really funny because Max has been doing that to people forever, and like Lando did it straight to Max, and I was just kind of internally laughing the whole time. And then wow, George out of nowhere, and that, like it was like, what is happening? Actually, we stood up and jumped off the couch and screamed. We were like, Lewis, Lewis! And then my wife was like, why is his helmet blue? And then we were like, oh, it's George.
Yeah, I screamed out loud and stood up real quick, and my dog barked, and I realized it was George, and I was happy, but I totally did find myself sitting back down immediately as it
Yeah.
registered in my head that it was George. But hey, great move anyways, right? Yeah, I think this race was a fun watch. It was like a PG-13 movie, like
Yeah.
everyone finishes safely, Logan Sargent finishes, but throughout the movie there's a couple of, ups and downs. Just like, like a very vanilla race if you really think about everything that happened, with the potential to have a lot of fuck ups because of the great wheel to wheel racing that we saw at a lot of the turns, especially turn one. George Russell coming around the outside from P3. Was he P4? I believe at the time it was P3.
No, yeah, he was P4 because Ham was P3, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, he was
qualifying. Yeah, he's
smart.
P4. Yeah, he came around the left outside of the entire starting line essentially to get uh, into P1. Granted, it only lasted for like 2-3 laps, but for a while he was there. He was there, and no one else was with him. So
He
great
led a
job by
race, and
George.
yeah, he was really good. Like, it at least showed that like inner attacking spirit. There was people who posted, on the live watches on Reddit. They were like, "In the time of George Russell has begun," and they were like, "This aged like sour milk." Like it's because it didn't last that long, but uh, sadly, Lando has uh, quite the record of not being able to convert his poles. I mean, this is only his second pole, but he's had two, sprint race pole positions, if you can call them that. And he's lost the lead into turn one all four times, which is not a stat you really want to have in this sport. Something is off with his starts, or he's just maybe not so used to being at the front of the pack, and he has to figure out how to handle those nerves. But props to George for attacking and getting it. I just Max is Max, and unfortunately, I think George also has some pressure issues. So maybe Lando and George need to go some mountain in Tibet and train to harden up a little bit or something. Because
Yeah, I mean, I think when the pack is so close together as it's starting to get right now, there's going to be a lot of instances where you're going to be fighting for your position, even if you're a leader of the pack, like McLaren is, or at least under Norris, uh, and the Red Bulls, and even sometimes the Ferraris. That it can give way to the team right behind you to come and make an overtake move, and it happened a couple of times today, or sorry, this week. Another example of it was essentially Norris fighting with George halfway through the race, and the increase in position that Verstappen was able to establish there, but then also on the back end, Lewis catching up slowly but surely, and then ultimately making a pass on George. and getting the P3 position for himself. So George had a really strong start to the race. I don't think he fell, below any of the Ferraris at any point. So he kept his race mostly with the McLarens, and most specifically with Lando Norris, because Oscar Piastri was significantly behind the pack throughout the entire race. So yeah, it was a bit of I would say it was probably like a B for George. If I were to rate it anything, probably like a minus for Norris, maybe a B plus for him. So I think they had a very similar race in certain ways. I think they could have optimized a lot more. I think George could have kept in that P2 P3 spot. I mean, I'm happy as hell that Hamilton was able to secure his first podium in over a year. So I'm not gonna bash against that too much. But when we talk about complaining, I think someone that complained the most out of everyone on the grid was Carlos Sainz.
Yeah.
This dude, every single time something happened to him, he had there's a really great overtake that Hamilton had on Sainz, and they. I think they might have touched a little bit, but essentially Carlos took the outside lane. He gave Lewis the inside position, ever so slightly, on the turn one, which Lewis took because if you have the space, you're going to take it, and then which forced Carlos to go around the outside, and he was like, he hit my car. Someone, he reported it to the gods. He had a very similar issue with his teammate Charles Leclerc, and almost made dire contact with him. I think it was around like lap 14 or so. So Carlos was just on the radio for all the wrong reasons this week. I think the pressure of a hometown race, added on top of the fact that he doesn't have a seat just yet, and the seats that are open to him are rather lackluster. So I think a lot of that was, Carlos was really wearing his emotions on his sleeves this week, and I think it really shows where his headspace is at now, as opposed to where it was when he snagged a P1 earlier this year. So, what do you think about Carlos, Chris? I think he's going to become. We're going to revisit the topic of drivers and where they're going to go later on in this episode, but just based on this week's race with Carlos and how aggressive he was with Charles and kind of just his demeanor over the radio, do you think this is like the signs of someone who you would still put a team behind, or do you think this is just signs that Carlos Sainz is not worth the investment, and that teams like Mercedes are better served by going with someone a little bit younger?
Yeah, I don't know. Like it's difficult to tell just because we don't know everything that's going on behind the scenes, but it's very clear that there is some sort of turmoil going on within the Ferrari organization. Uh, Carlos,
When has there not been turmoil in the Ferrari organization?
I mean, that's true, but for a little bit there, it looked like you took the appendix out, and we were getting some. We got a Monaco win for Charles, and we got a win for Carlos, and they were doing pretty well and on the up and up. But I think as the races tick by, and as Carlos keeps getting hounded and hounded and hounded with questions about his future, and like you said, he has options, but all of them kind of stink to him, and I'm sure it's pretty difficult knowing. Like, listen, when you know that you could do good job at Red Bull, and like their current driver gets a 2-year contract extension, and he is like consistently finishing and not making Q3s, and barely getting points, like that's probably got to eat you up alive and just be like, what the hell. And so I'm sure he's a little sour and a little bitter. And then, he wants to outperform his teammate. He wants to prove to the world how good he is. But then, Ferrari is probably trying to semi prioritize Charles. And there's just a lot of angst there. And I think, Carlos is probably being a little bit of a diva. But I mean, I can understand a little bit of it. I still think he's a good driver to have, and I think a lot of drivers or a lot of teams would love to have him. But I do think he's gonna whatever team he joins, he's gonna be 1 foot out the door on day one. Like he's gonna be like, let's let one of these young drivers screw up, and I'll take my seat back in the top team in a year or two at the most. Maybe the startings of another Daniel Ricciardo story of getting into the RB and being like, this is temporary until I get back into a Red Bull, and that's never going to happen. So could be the beginning of the end for Carlos. Um, I don't know what to tell the guy other than just, you're lucky, you're good looking, you're rich, and you're driving in Formula One. Just enjoy the ride while you can.
I sometimes tell myself that whenever I'm down, but
You have to.
I think that this is probably going to be a weekend where they just kind of forget it because he's not going to be coming back next year anyways. So I don't think it does him any good to harp on a situation like this. I mean, you brought about the fact that there's turmoil within Ferrari. There's also a lot of turmoil that's being kind of I don't know. Someone's fanning the flames of Mercedes turmoil and them doing Lewis wrong, purposefully, and that there's some sort of insider note that made its way around to beat reporters saying that someone the organization is trying to essentially sabotage Lewis. I think it's a lot of bullshit. It's also because there's no point. Like why would any team go try to actively sabotage someone that's won them 7 world championships and then and try to cover like there's really no incentives to it.
I
So
think
I don't.
also the ink is dry. Like
Yeah,
Lewis,
like there's nothing to do now. Yeah, like
yeah, what are you gonna do? Like embarrass him by making him lose a position, and Ferrari's gonna be like, "Oh God, we don't want Lewis." No,
yeah,
like there's no reason to sabotage him. Now we have talked a lot before about maybe Lewis is attending less meetings about the future
sure.
car, the future direction of Mercedes, but no one is like Toto's not going in and like turning down his engine dial or something secretly. That's just if anybody says stuff like that, you just no. It's
Yeah, I had a couple people send me like articles that like I didn't even were F1 fans, quite honestly, just send me articles, and I was just like, "The hell is this?" Like, and why does these articles have so many likes on them? And I was like, man, any moment you can to insert a little bit of drama, like someone's gonna take it. Someone's gonna take the clickbait. So I think do have to do your own filtering and make sure that the news that you're getting is somewhat accurate. But yeah, I think the signs issue internally at Ferrari, the Lewis issue that's people are kind of like fanning the smoke on and within Mercedes, I think it's all kind of just fluff. I think the real drama is essentially who are we about to lose and who's going to come in and what are going to be the cuts that are going to be necessary. Because at a certain point, we can't live in the gray anymore. These teams and drivers can't live in the gray anymore. They're going to have to say something. So I'd love to talk about that a little bit more, Chris. We're expected to lose a couple of drivers this upcoming season. We're expected to get some new blood. Let's go with the obvious suspects, and then I want to kind of hear your thoughts on any wild, and any wild cards that you think could potentially flip and be left without a seat.
yeah, let's do it.
Let's start from the bottom because we all love a good Logie Sargi. Where do you think he's going? There's speculation he's going to go to IndyCar. Do you think that's any credence to that?
Yeah, I think that's his most likely scenario. I mean, we talked about this last episode a little bit. It's such a weird thing where they're so public about their information, but like they can't officially say anything. I mean, you have James Vowles publicly saying, "We want Carlos, we want Carlos, we want Carlos." Logan has to do a lot more to keep a seat. It's like you've already told the world that you want a different driver. There's no so yeah, I think Logan knows it. I think everybody knows it. And I think IndyCar is his most likely, scenario. I mean, I watched the 24-hour Le Mans and it was a great experience to watch it. Like there was a lot of rain and safety car, but I got to watch the majority of it, probably like 19 to 20 hours of it, and Nick DeVries almost won that race, and he, obviously there's more than him. There's three drivers, but Nick DeVries was as bad as you could get in F1. But he's a Formula E champion, and he almost won Le Mans 24. Antonio Giovinazzi won Le Mans last year, and it's just one of those things that Logan could be a terrible F1 driver and be a really great IndyCar driver. We don't know, but it's possible. And I'd like to see if he does have talent in different disciplines. So, but yeah, I definitely think that's where he's going to end up.
Yeah, it's definitely easier to look bad in a group of 33 cars than it is in a group of 20 cars. So maybe he'll be able to kind of finally just hide behind his shame in IndyCar series. But it's also getting super competitive on the IndyCar circuit. So maybe he's just gonna become an IndyCar kind of like standby and then eventually exit motorsports altogether. So yeah, I don't really have the highest of hopes for Logan Sargent. I think he is 100% losing his drive for next season, especially with the way that James Vowles is kind of shopping around very, very publicly. Cool. Let's go to Zhou Guan Yu. What do you think his career is going to look like?
So the rumor is that he's essentially out of F1, but that his team is offering an insane amount of money to keep him in the sport. I think the number that got floated around was like 30 million for the Haas seat. And, obviously that's just pure speculation. And, I don't know where that source is coming from, but that was the rumor, was that his team offered 30 million for him to have the open Haas seat. And so just like the Checo situation, we all thought Checo was going to probably be out for, a Liam Lawson or a promoted Yuki or whatever, just because he hasn't been performing. And, money talks, t-shirt sales, merch sales, sponsors. If these teams need the money, then it is what it is. Personally, I'd rather see someone like a Valtteri in that Haas seat, just because he never crashes and he's stable and he could teach Ollie if he comes. We'll get to that in a second. But um, I'm probably like 60-40 on Joe staying or going versus staying. I definitely don't think he's been so nowheresville. We've talked about that too. I'd personally like to see him go, not just I like the guy and he's likable and whatnot, but he hasn't really done a ton in the sport, and he's had 3 years now. So I'd be open to replacing him to get some new blood into the sport.
Yeah, I think I got to agree with you there in terms of the 60-40 split. I would say maybe more like 65-35 in terms of him, I think, leaving the sport, or at least leaving F1, and then him potentially staying. I think his drive might be closer to Alpine. The reason I say that is because Alpine, from a marketing perspective, is kind of hemorrhaging their commercial car sales, right? I think the plan was ideally that they use this Renault Alpine F1 outlet as a way to get the brand out to markets that they haven't been able to tap into outside of France and certain parts of Europe. I still think that for the price point, like the American market is just not going to go for it, right? I think there are other cars that kind of have beat them to the punch here. And the reason I say all that is because there's a big brand affinity that has to kind of take place with a lot of these, you know, outside the Mercedes and the Ferraris. It's really important for brands like Alpine to be able to use F1 as a marketing ploy, right? And I think if you took Zhou and kind of the brand identity of Alpine, maybe there is a play there to attract the Chinese markets. Maybe be able to sell a little bit more into them. Maybe have tie-ins with those sponsors that are a part of Zhou's independent team. I think that there's, but I also don't think Alpine's shrewd enough to optimize on those relationships either. I think from the top down, we talked about this so many times before, Chris. It is the culture of the team is going to be dictated by top down, and I think top down in at Alpine, they don't even want Renault engines. So
Yeah,
so it's like they are essentially disassociating themselves from themselves, and they're really trying to ride the high of having all these celebrity endorsers as opposed to making a better engine and a better product. Um, so I can definitely see Joe going more the Alpine route if Alpine's able to capitalize on some of those connectors with the Chinese markets, right? Be able to sell more commercial Alpines into that market. That's really where my head's at, and it's totally outside of performance and anything, like so it's so like that's what the state of the state of the union for Alpine is that they are trying to sell commercial cars, and it's going to hurt them if the perspective from the outside looking in is that they don't even trust their own engine makers.
yeah,
So
that's awesome.
I think to save some face, like maybe Alpine is better served at a driver level by having someone like Valtteri, but I think they're even better served to rectify some of that commercial hemorrhaging by bringing on Joe and potentially aggressively trying to tap into some subsect of the Chinese market that they weren't able to break into because God knows it's not happening in America.
Yeah, I agree. Like this whole Renault trying to drop Renault engines and become
It's
a custom
embarrassing.
machine. It's at that moment I was like, you just have to sell to Andretti at this point.
Yeah,
Like you can't publicly say our own company sucks. Like that's corporate suicide. Anyways, they have a lot of fixings to do from like you said, top down, all from the top guy to their drivers. They need to figure some stuff out.
yeah, it's definitely a mess, but so is Joe. Quite honestly, I think there are ways that he could save himself, but yeah, I think that 65-35 split is kind of where I land at with him. I think he is half step out of the series if we had to make a decision tomorrow. Um, let's talk about Kevin Magnussen. So K Mag had he didn't have the worst race this week. Um, well, actually, never mind. He finished 17th. He did have a pretty bad race, so never mind. I take that back. I don't think he's going to be in. I don't think it would be smart to keep him. But there's this weird relationship between K Mag and Haas and Gene. He really likes K Mag for some reason. I have half a thought that he's going to stay, even though I think they're better suited with someone like Valtteri. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it's as simple as this. I think the only thing that matters to Gene is the bottom line. And, like even though K Mag has a reputation for making stupid moves and causing accidents and stuff like that, they're never like Schumacher level breaking the car in half accidents. So I think he's like a stable guy. He's got some kids and he gets the car around the track, and I think that's the most important thing. And he probably just likes the guy personally. So that's I want something like Valtteri. I think he could slot into that role a little bit better and have the knowledge of the Mercedes and a bottom team now to sort of like bring that expertise into the fold of Haas. But I agree with you. I could see it going either way. K Mag could easily stay. I do think his time in the sport is up. He was lucky with that whole Uralkali Mazepin stuff to get called up last minute and get a second chance at F1. But yeah, I think it's time for him to go. But I could, like you said, see him staying just because of his relationship with Gene, which ultimately would upset me if it cost Valtteri his seat in F1. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think with K Mag, I'm somewhere in that camp of 65% chance that he'll stay, 35% chance that Yeah, that makes sense. 35% chance that he'll go. So essentially the same but opposite of what I think about Joe.
Yep.
So I think that just by virtue of Gene liking him and the fact that I think they're probably expected to bring in Ollie Behrman, they're probably going to keep K Mag and just have him be the the old guy, the old head on staff to kind of help usher in the new driver, barring anything really terrible happening throughout the season with him maybe having more crashes or keeping up this streak of like multiple penalty points, race over race. So I think that even though I don't like to admit to it, I think K Mag is probably going to likely stay in that seat. Um, and if anyone were to contest it, it probably would be someone like Valtteri. But I think we need to see the results of the a couple of remaining races left in the calendar. So let's turn to Daniel Ricciardo. Chris, I'm gonna let you start with this one, man, because I have mixed feelings, and you know my feelings about this. But where are you at with Danny Rick? Do you think he's gonna stay? Do you think V Carb is gonna give him the boot?
Listen, this one's difficult because I kind of feel like this decision should have been made already. Um,
Yeah, that's a
and
good
I
way to
don't
put
know
it.
why it hasn't, especially since Yuki has already been signed. Um, so that's the only thing that gives me pause because I know that Christian has a soft spot for Danny Rick, and it's the reason why he's in the seat now, and it's the reason why he may potentially stay. But we've said this before, and I'll say it again: anything other than Liam Lawson taking that spot is incorrect. So, I mean, listen, Danny's had his time. He's had his opportunities. Like, and he finished what P15 this race after riding in ink on the back of his helmet, not without a fight. Like he, you're not going to get any worse results with Liam. Like at the moment, it's like no points, nothing. Like let's at least see what Liam can do. He had that proving ground already. He showed promise, and at worst, it's going to be a swap, but with a driver who has a future that's unknown, and he could develop to be an amazing racer. He might already be. So, but Danny is on obviously the decline. So the same thing with we just talked about with Gene and Mag, like could end up happening with Christian and Danny, and he gets to keep his seat. Um, but I'd like Liam to be in that seat. That would be my pick.
Yeah, I think it's another one of those wait and see kind of things because there's no danger of Liam leaving next season, which is what I think Red Bull is banking on right now and V Carb. I would like to say that it's a 25-75 split between Danny leaving and then him staying, um, which which kind of sucks. I really wish it was the other way around. I think there's like a 25% chance that he leaves, but I think that V Carb is just going to sign him on for another year.
It's probably the safe play for them, just because I'm sure the way Red Bull structures their contracts that they can make swaps and changes and move people around at will. So they're like, let's see what happens. Let's wait. We'll give Danny the year. And like 4 or 5 races in, if he's, not performing and we have a good car, slot Liam in that seat. We'll see. But you're probably right about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be. I wish I was wrong, and I wish that it was actually flipped. But what I'm seeing is that they haven't made any kind of commitment to Liam. They haven't been non-committal about Danny explicitly, right? They've kind of been keeping everything mums, and then now that the Yuki contract is settled, at least for the near term, um, all attention is going to turn to Danny more and more as the season progresses. It's funny to think we're not even halfway through the season, so there's still a lot of racing left to do, and Danny might have a little spark every now and again, and that might be enough for VCarb to justify keeping him in seat. But man, do I wish that Liam had some sort of um, lever in this matter that he could pull to kind of maybe jeopardize uh, uh, not jeopardize, but maybe at least put some accountability on VCARB's decision making and kind of how they're going about it. So yeah, if I had it my way, Danny Rick would be sidelined and Liam Lawson would be in. I think it would make for much better racing. I also hate just the fucking the writing in the ink and all this like dumb shit. I don't
Honestly,
really
though,
even know. I would say pageantry, but like the entire sport's a pageant. It's the dumb extra shit that like it's just so corny at this point. It's not even like inspiring. It's just
hey, he like Danny Rick has lost basically everything for me. Like I used to love the guy. He was one of my favorite aspects of the sport when I first started watching, and because he was like infectious, like that's why he got so popular and rose to the level he did, just because like he carried this aura around him. Obviously, everyone talked about his smile. He was a good driver, and but now every shot on TV is him like dropping his head. He's always looking like he like hates himself or whatever. Or is like I could do better, and he's always making these comments and everything like that. And it just gets old after a while. Like either own up to it or do something differently, or be happy all the time, even when you're losing, and like still be that guy. But like now you're just this guy who you can publicly see that you're like, oh, he's like the guy like in Napoleon Dynamite, like Uncle Rico is like, I used to be good at football or whatever like that. It's like nobody
yeah, yeah. He's he's definitely. I definitely sold my stock in Danny Ricardo a long time ago. If
Yeah.
to put it lightly. All right, let's turn over to Nico Hulkenberg. I mean, he signed to Audi. He's good. We don't really need to. I think it's a great sign for Audi. I think it's a great thing for Nico. I think he's one of my favorite drivers on the grid. He's just such a beast.
I just
Um,
want I just want him to get his first podium in the Audi, and that would be amazing.
I do too. Yeah, I think he's just something that you just mentioned about Danny Rick about like either be the guy that's always smiling and bubbly despite the fact that you're in the trenches, or really just shut up and just don't say anything. Don't do this half-assed thing. I think Nico does a great job of maintaining his like composure and kind of mannerisms and like being easy to be a teammate with, like especially when K Mag did that dumbass move a couple races ago. I forgot what it was, but he cracked. It was the one with Perez where was it Monaco where they were going up the street?
Monaco, yeah.
Yeah, and Nico was like that was unnecessary. And that's all he said. And I have so much respect for Nico Hulkenberg, man. Like the fact that he's just been grinding against you know, against the seasons like year over year. Doesn't really have the most to show for it, but like his presence is like welcomed. I think in most paddocks. I think like that's why Audi like made such a push to get him, out of other drivers, and and I think he's gonna land in a place that's gonna really appreciate him, right? I've been watching the IndyCar docu series on Netflix, and there's this driver Phil Rosenquist who like essentially was I believe he was driving for McLaren as one of their three drivers, and his freshman season he crushed it, and then since then he really wasn't able to live back up to those standards, and McLaren essentially like just treated him kind of like shit and just dropped him. And now that he's at a new team, like he's been able to flourish again, right? Like they're able to like show him some love. And I think that's what Nico really needs is like a place that like shows him love, and like there's like a really good through line between the brand Audi, which is a German brand, and the driver Nico Hulkenberg, who's German. So like I don't know, I think he really found a sweet spot, and I tip my hat off to Nico Hulkenberg, especially because in qualifying he just shows up.
Yeah, he like I like the guy. Didn't really know much about him for a while, and you hit the nail on the head that he only makes noise when it's necessary, and he knows where he's at. He knows his lot in life. He knows his job, and he shows up and he does it. and he knows that he's not winning races, and he's okay with that. Like he extracts the most out of what he can with what he has, and hats off to him, like you said.
Yeah, let's go to a driver that does have a contract signed, but I still want to get your thoughts on it. Alex Albon. He has had a tough go of it for the last couple of weeks in that Williams, finishing P18 was not the best race for Alex. He's staying. I think this would probably be more of a commentary on does is there a world where if someone like Valtteri or Carlos came in, would that actually facilitate Alex's races and kind of put him in a better standing? Or do you think like he's better? He we've probably seen the best of him against Logan Sargent. Do you think like iron sharpens iron in this instance, or do you think like he would fold to the pressures of having someone like Carlos or Valtteri come into the D2?
No, I think Alex, is a world class driver, and I think if he has a really good teammate that they could like work together and pair up and maybe like you know drift each other on the track, do better in qualifying, and play the team game. I think having a really good teammate would be good for Alex. I think Williams just still has some growing pains, and I think that other teams are progressing so much faster at the moment, which is really making Williams like slow progress like really stand out. And I don't know how they're going to solve that, but Alex said in one of his post race interviews that the car felt great. I felt really good in the car, and it obviously was much better for everybody else because they all went faster around the track and they did better. But he's like, I had no issues. Like the car was amazing. I felt good. And he goes, so I think we just lack something in the car at the moment. And so, I think he's doing what he can. But I did like having Logan as a teammate obviously is not helping. You're probably not getting a lot of feedback. And I think somebody like Carlos or Valtteri or whoever will take that seat, might push them. But I think James also has a big job to do in getting that car to like where it needs to be. Because my biggest fear is that Alex is going to do this year, do next year, and by the time Williams' car is finally back to where it needs to be, if it ever gets there, like Alex's career will be like at its end point, which is a little upsetting. But that that's the thing about F1 is unfortunately we only have 4 teams at the moment that are like really solid. I think the whole grid needs to do a little bit better.
Yeah, I think this is an instance where if you put Carlos Sainz in, it could jeopardize Alex's mental kind of the hold that he has on that team. It could be in jeopardy too. You could say that he is the D1 driver, and anyone can say anything. But I think when it comes down to track position, and Alex might concede to Carlos, because I do think Carlos is a better driver than Alex Albon if both cars were the same. That I think would have Alex take a couple of steps back. We haven't really seen Alex come up against any kind of contention since his days at Red Bull when he was a younger driver, and we saw him, maybe falter because he was so young. Since then, he's had a string of just really lackluster pairings, and maybe going from a Logan Sargent to a Carlos Sainz might be too extreme. Maybe Valtteri Bottas would be the best fit for Williams driver's seat, but also to pair with Alex Albon. I think that those two would strike a much safer balance and give Williams the amount of usable feedback and data from the drivers that they need to be able to capitalize their car on. So I think Alex can his fate can swing one of two ways. I think if Carlos comes in, he just has to nut up and just perform like at his best. And if Valtteri comes in, then Williams probably has a state uh, of uh, of affairs where both drivers are now contributing to the greater good, as opposed to Carlos when he's coming in. He's just going to want one thing, and that's going to be to win podiums for himself. And he might even think of Williams as a stopgap on his road to another big time team. So a lot of moving pieces. I think with the departure of Logan, we'll see how things shake out. Let's talk about Lance Stroll, our best friend and partner in crime. I am gonna say that there is a 40% chance he does not come back, and a 60% chance that he does come back. This is the highest probability I felt that he will be leaving the sport that I have ever felt. What say you, Chris?
I say that there's 1,000% chance that he never leaves the sport until he's physically pulled and dragged away. I literally think there's a 0% chance of him leaving. I think that I don't know what goes around in his head, but I've watched a couple interviews with him and I've watched some
It's
stuff.
delusion, complete delusion.
I 100% think that he truly and honestly believes that he's in this situation based on his talent and his ability and not all the other stuff that's the actual truth, which it's a shame because like obviously we've talked about this before. He's not Mazepin. He's not Logan Sargent. Like he has some ability. It's just there are lots of other drivers who have more ability than him and don't cause like silly accidents in practice and qualifying or whatever. Like him bumping it, like and like when he ran into Lewis, like he's like yelling over the radio, like, "Oh my god, he ran into me out of nowhere," and then he gets the penalty. Like it's so obvious that he's the problem, but I think he's delusioned, and I think maybe he's thought about it before for like 3 seconds, and he's like, "Nah, let's like the Simpsons principle is like, no, it's the kids who are wrong. It's like I'm like I'm Lance Stroll, like I'm the best, like I deserve to be in this sport." So you know, I don't think he's going anywhere. I don't think as long as Papa Stroll is in charge, and that's probably the first thing that happens when he sits down in any meeting. Papa Stroll is like, by the way, Lance is staying. Don't bring it up. But I don't
It's
know.
just I don't really have more thoughts on it. I just really hope that if I say it loud enough that he will exit the sport. But you're probably right. He's probably going to end up staying, and uh, I'm really hoping that tennis bug hits him in the butt, and he's just like, you know what? I'm going to go try my hand out at tennis, and then he breaks his hand again and realize he can't do tennis either. But but all right, us keep moving along. So we kind of covered up the bottom of the pack, sort of say. Let's go towards the mid of the pack and then slightly above that. So mid of the pack right now, in terms of points and kind of in terms of just general driver ability, you got Pierre and Esteban. Let's do them. Let's do them as a pair. So Esteban is leaving Alpine. Pierre staying. So there's really no speculation on that front. Where do you think Esteban's gonna end up? Where do you think is gonna be best suited for his skill level? Because Haas was
Honestly,
it's starting to come up more in conversation as Haas.
yeah, I mean, honestly, for me, it's like 50-50. Um, I think there's a very small chance that Esteban actually like loses the musical chairs and ends up without a seat, uh,
Mm.
just because there may be more stable options out there. I think the only thing that's going for him is he's a little bit younger than someone like a Valtteri, and he's obviously like hungry and wants it. But I just think that like I don't really see enough in Esteban to like want to warrant him over a lot of these other guys, and so like Haas. Obviously, that's come up, but I'd rather have someone like Valtteri in the Haas seat, or like if Joe gets that seat from with the money. I don't know where else Esteban goes because like Alpine is like one of the only other seats, and he's obviously already parted ways with them. And so, maybe he ends up at Audi. I don't know.
That's what I was thinking. I think he ends up at Audi because Audi doesn't know any better.
Yeah, probably.
You know what I mean? I mean, I think they got the guy that they were going after, which is Nico Hulkenberg. I absolutely believe that from a strategic point, from a from the branding point, it really makes sense that they went after Nico Hulkenberg, especially because Nico's been having a really strong showing in a Haas car that's not so great. But again, it's going to be Steak Sauber that they're going to be taking over operations from, and look at Steak Sauber; they're the worst. They don't know, I don't think, what difference it makes that if they have like a driver who's like willing to play ball with the rest of the team or not. And I put Esteban in the camp of not. I hear he's a really lovely person, and I don't doubt it. He's probably a really nice guy. But the way that translates onto the field, or sorry, onto the track, and to how he receives information from his team and how he interprets situations, like it's somewhat selfish, and I guess he's had to be selfish to get to where he is. But you've got to cut that shit out at a certain point. Like it is a team sport still, and I think no team wants to get behind someone that's like that. But if you don't know any better, then you're gonna pick the guy that you think is gonna go the fastest in your car because you already have your number one locked down. So I think in that instance, he maybe does make sense for an Audi.
Yeah, it's very possible. And I think that's probably the most likely scenario for him. If he doesn't get the Haas, like um, Kevin Magnussen in one of the pressers basically said that all this is going to be sorted out as soon as Carlos picks his spot. Because,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I think Carlos, if he goes to Williams, he goes to Williams, and all the other dominoes fall. But if he doesn't go to Williams, then I think Valtteri probably gets that Williams seat, and then all the dominoes fall so much differently. So, you know, we'll see what
I mean,
happens.
a Carlos Nico lineup wouldn't. I mean, that would be the bag of the year for Audi. And who knows? Maybe they do pull out a stellar year one performance and have something in their back pocket, a la engineers that they can bring from their commercial side onto the F1 side of things, and that they're super talented. I mean, those are things that are probably we're not going to be privy to, but that it's definitely something that that could happen, right? And it's happened before with teams like Braun and shit like that. So, okay, let's now look at some of the guys that have a seat already, but could also maybe potentially lose it. And when I say that, I mean Sergio Perez. So he's got the 1+1 contract. Dude's not looking super hot. He got P8 this week behind Oscar Piastri. He finished pretty much had a whole race only against Alpine. And when you're in a Red Bull like this, like it just I don't know. I don't think this is he's not I don't think he's going to make it to that +1 portion of his contract. What do you think? Do you think he's going to make it to year two, or do you think he's going to flail out after this next year?
Um, if you want my honest opinion, I think Checo doesn't even make it through next year if the performance holds. Um, I think we're like, let's see, the McLaren has outscored Red Bull by 22 points over the last four races. If that continues, Red Bull's going to lose constructors, which is worth many many millions, and Checo is already looking bad now. Toto Wolff has a theory that the Red Bull is not as good as everyone thinks it is, and it's just Max. Like Max is, I think Toto Wolff is quoted saying Max has 3/10 on every other driver on the grid right now as ability as a driver, which is insane. So maybe Sergio's underperforming, but he's underperforming a little bit closer to where he should be. He should be in like the P4, P5 zone. But if Checo keeps performing where he's missing qualifying, missing points, and like getting, what did he get? 4 points in this race?
Mm. He got
That's not
yeah, he
good
got four
enough for Red
points.
Bull Racing. Like,
Yeah.
and they're going to lose constructors, and Max won't be able to, if the situation holds where Max is not going to win every race for the rest of the season, that occasionally we're going to get some Lando wins, some maybe a George Russell Lewis Hamilton win, or some more Carlos and Charles wins. Like they're gonna lose WDC, they're gonna lose the constructors potentially. So I think Checo, if he has the rest of that season, he has a contract, but I think something like a Danny Rick situation is going to happen where they're going to buy out his contract, pay him not to drive, and bring in, Liam Lawson or whoever they can at the time.
Just not Yuki Tsunoda.
Yeah, just not Yuki Tsunoda. He's too small for the Red Bull, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, which is a great segue. Let's talk about Yuki. He's going to be signed on for the next year with RB or with VCarb. I don't think there's anything that this man can do to be considered seriously for an RB seat, and some of it I think has to do with the fact that his first impressions on the grid probably weren't as impressive as someone like Oscar Piastri. I also, candidly think it has to do with the fact that he is an Asian driver, and maybe there is uh, less of, there's probably less of an expectation out of him because of that. I think I've mentioned this before on past episodes, Chris, but like I think there is a underserving of Asian drivers on the grid historically, and the ones that have come in have typically been pay to play drivers. Yuki has been slightly different in that he might have been pay to play, like he does bring a certain amount of money, sponsorship money with him, uh, but he's also very good at what he does, and he's progressed probably more than anyone else on the grid that I've seen over the past 4 years. And to not consider him seriously, especially by a team that's ran by Helmut Marko, who is the poster child for progressivism, uh, I think there's a lot that's going to be working against him in this family of Red Bull, V Carb, whatever you want to call it. That's going to keep him down. I think he's better served going somewhere else if he does want to go into a higher tiered team. And I think his skill level, he's unlocked some bits of skill level that he didn't have before that maybe now do justify him being like at Aston Martin or something like that. What do you think about Yuki, man? Do you think I'm kind of just blowing smoke here? Do you think there's some credence to the fact that they're not taking him seriously because he is an Asian driver? Like, what do you think the big holdup is here with them?
I mean, I think Yuki had like you said, a bad first impression. Just from he came out with a really strong out of the gate, really strong. I think he like scored points in his first race on the grid, which is great. But then he kind of had a lackluster rest of the season, and he had anger management issues. He was always yelling over the radio and doing really stupid stuff, reacting stupidly. And then he also is just really quirky. Like he says really weird, dumb shit in his interviews and stuff like that. So I think maybe he just like didn't fit the mold, but he obviously has talent, so they want to keep him around. But if you want my honest opinion, I think Red Bull's just a mess, the whole organization, and I think a lot of it has to do with Max, everything being centered around Max, and so they just don't want to disrupt the status quo, and the whole RB or Red Bull Junior program has like been destroyed. I mean, like Liam should already have a seat right now. You're like bringing back Daniel instead of doing that. Like we're not seeing the progression for basically anybody at the moment of do really well in the feeder seaters or as a junior driver or as a reserve driver and then move up once I've earned. I mean, Liam made an amazing first impression coming in when Danny broke his hand and just like nailed it basically and still hasn't gotten a seat. So I think they're just all caught up into this system that unfortunately isn't doing any favors for them. And I think, yeah, like you said, I think Yuki needs to leave. But as we've talked about already, it's like, where do you go? It's just, You're not going to get into the Ferraris. Mercedes is going to be locked down unless George starts underperforming and maybe Yuki can swap into that seat. I don't know, but I think Yuki's just going to be another tale of someone who spends some time in F1 just kind of doing his thing at a mid-tier team, and that's his career. And it's
Yeah,
unfortunate, but not everyone can have a top seat, and that's just it's unfortunate.
yeah. Well, some of the guys that do have top seats that we aren't going to discuss a whole lot because they have everything locked in is Max Verstappen. He's going to stay with Red Bull. Lando Norris, he's going to probably stay with McLaren for the rest of his life. Lewis Hamilton is going to Ferrari. George Russell is going to be, for now, the poster child at Mercedes. Charles Leclerc signed a multi-year deal with Ferrari. Oscar Piastri, again, is probably going to be with McLaren for the long term. Um, and that's about it. Fernando Alonso, I guess let's wrap it up with him. Where do you think Mr. Alonso is going? I think he has one more year left in him, and then after a disappointing season at Aston Martin for a 2025 stint, I think he's going to exit the sport.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think Fernando retires next year at the end of the season. Honestly, I think that there's probably a 20% chance that he retires at the end of this season
Mm.
if he just doesn't feel like it's going very well and maybe he wants to open up the door for a younger driver and he feels there's opportunity within the Aston organization to just make a bigger difference. But yeah, either way, it's either this year or next year. Fernando's probably going to go and take his spot within Aston Martin. Um, go to yacht parties with Papa Stroll and whatnot. But we'll see who finally gets to take that seat and be Lance's new teammate. They have a history of only putting ex-world champions in there, so there's not very many of them left to do that. So I'm curious who would get that seat.
They're gonna probably bring back someone from the dead to just put in there, just so Lance looks good.
Yep. Just
Um, all
call
right.
Seb back up. Hey man, we need you back.
It's like, hey, dude, remember that seat that we kicked you out of? We're gonna need you back here again.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right, let's talk winners, losers, and hot seats. So it looks like in our winners, we both have Verstappen and Hamilton. Talk to me. What stood out to you about Verstappen and Hamilton's race?
Yeah, I mean, Verstappen again, like this is the second time that winning wasn't necessarily easy for him. I think Hannah on the Red Bull pit lane is the best strategist in the game, and I think they did an amazing job. He does a really good job with tire dag. Hannah does a really good job at calling strategies, when to pit, when to undercut, when to overcut, and I think they just basically had a perfect race, and Verstappen drove his heart out to basically win this race. I think Lando lost this race. I think he could have easily won this race had he followed in with Max's pits or made a few different decisions. So I think Verstappen is finally being tested on track car wise and still winning races. So it just shines out. And then, I think George got a little bit screwed with getting onto the hards, but I don't know how many tires that they had left. But Hamilton finally, they've been talking a lot about how he hasn't finished inside the top six this season. This has been his worst season to date, and to see him up at the podium, all smiles, getting huge support from the Spanish fans and stuff like that, when historically he hasn't had as much support in his early days there. So he noticeably said that people were supporting him more than usual, and it was feel really nice to see him out there. Like
Yeah, I mean,
they were spraying each other with champagne, and
they
like they looked like they had
solve
a good time.
racism, dude. They solve racism out
It's
in
it's
Spain.
over.
Yeah, it's
It's
over,
over.
dude. It's finito, is what they're
Finito.
telling me.
Just take a
Yeah.
siesta in the races.
I mean, yeah. So kind of expanding on your thoughts about tire strategy. So it's interesting. This race, Verstappen came into pits in lap 17, Hamilton in 16, and Russell at lap 15. All three of them started on used soft tires, which is probably was the optimal way to go for this race. Norris stayed out on fresh soft tires all the way through lap 23. So Verstappen, Hamilton, and Russell all had a chance to undercut Norris. Not sure exactly what the strategy was there for to keeping him out so long. But then, yeah, they switched over to mediums. All four of them did. And then Hamilton went back on to use soft tires to retain his P3 position. Yeah, they fucked George by giving him those hard tires at lap 43 and on lap 36, and it kind of just kept him from being able to make gains back into the top three. So yeah, I think in a lot of ways the strategy worked in favor of Verstappen and Hamilton. Just as importantly, it worked against Norris and Russell. So yeah, I think in terms of strategies, I think certain days they fall in certain drivers' favor, and I think this week it fell in Verstappen and Hamilton's favor. Another team I have on the winner circle, and it's because I don't get a chance to say this a whole lot. I have Alpine in the winner circle. They've been going through a tumultuous last few weeks, especially with the announcement of them abandoning their Renault engine, just the exodus of all these talented people from their engineering staff and their design staff and leadership, all of that going on, and they still managed to get P9, P10. Hats off to Alpine. Can't say any more than that. Won't say any
Yeah.
more than that.
Well, before the race started, people were like, "Oh shit, they're starting side by side.
They're going
That's
to kill
bad."
each other. Yeah, that's bad.
And double points. I call that a win. And it is P9 and P10, but it's way better than P11 and P12. So or DNF. So you know they
Take it
obviously
where you can get it.
take it where you can get it. They have a lot of work to do, but baby steps.
Yep. All right, let's talk losers. We got a couple of crossovers, but how about you kick it off first?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to put Norris on here. I mean, this guy had it all. Like he had arguably the fastest car on the weekend. He got pole, and he just kind of shit the bed. Like he has a really bad track record for starts. He lost it into I think it was like P3 after the start, maybe P4. I can't remember, but he basically had all the opportunities to win this race and didn't. Bad strategy. I think the team called and wanted him to pit to cover off George, but Norris over the radio again made his own decision, said no, we need to chase down Max, and then Max pits instead of him following suit. I think maybe he thought he was in clean air and could gain some time in clean air, but he just lost a shitload of time, and then he was catching him at the end, and he had maybe 10 more laps, he might have been able to catch him, but either way, bad calls. So even though P2, great result, he probably could have won this race with some better calls. So a little bit of tweaking and shoring up on Lando's part in the future, but we'll see what happens. And then I also have his teammate on there just because they basically have the fastest car on the grid, and he P7. So I don't know if that's a car, if it's him pace or whatnot, but Oscar has shown that he's better than that. So we'll see. How about yourself?
Yeah, so Logan Sargent, nothing new there. He's going to IndyCar, so hats off to him for making a decision. We'll see how that goes. I put Aston Martin in the loser circle. They've just been having a rough go of it. They have considerably been falling off from the P4 position that they were touting last year. I think McLaren had a lot of headway to get them out of that pack, but they also haven't done themselves any favor in terms of developing the car, getting it in a position where Fernando could even use his expertise to maybe eke out a P3. So probably the biggest fall from grace that I've seen over the past 2 years was with Aston Martin. I would say is Alpine, but they're probably starting at a much lower threshold of expectation than Aston Martin were. So yeah, I think Aston Martin they gotta do something to pivot back, and I think just putting money into their facilities while it worked at one point, and while maybe stealing design concepts from Red Bull and being first to copy those, it might have helped in certain instances, but you're now seeing the kind of the trailing stardust of what once was a really promising team. So yeah, I think Aston Martin is going to be squarely in my loser circle. A couple others is, we talked about already. Alex Albon, I have him on there. I think that he, I don't, maybe it is the car, but he has also kind of fallen from grace in sort of ways. So we'll see if he can pick it back up on the second half of this season. And then I think the Spanish viewers probably are losers. Both their hometown guys didn't really do all that great. This race, I think the only other uh, two continents or countries that can countries, not continents, that can kind of have a same demure when it comes to vote, cheering for multiple drivers is England and Australia, and Spain seems like they should have had at least someone up in podium is how I feel, and how they probably felt too, and they just kind of got stuck with having to cheer for Max.
Yeah, and I'll agree. And I'll tackle Leclerc on with signs under the Spanishes. These guys are the two best looking guys on the grid, and they're driving for the best car company to ever exist. And both of you spend half the race just bitching at each other, and then post race you're just arguing on the pit lane. I don't know if you saw the picture of Oscar Piastri standing in between them, and somebody posted Oscar defends his dad from Carlos Sainz or whatever like that, because the whole Charles adopting Oscar thing. But it's like, come on, guys, like finish Carlos's last season on a high. Go out there, remove your appendix again and win some more races. But yeah, these guys need to stop butting heads. Uh, Moving on to the hot seat, I think we both have the same guy who can't take the fastest car on the grid, or arguably used to be, Sergio Perez. This guy has had 3 or 4 really shitty races in a row, and he's in Nowheresville, and there's not even a blinking sign of brilliance left in him at the moment. So I think he has a lot of work to do, or he's in trouble.
So right now, as it stands, for points, Max has 219, Lando Norris has 150, Charles has 148, Carlos has 116, and Sergio still somehow maintaining 111. If Oscar Piastri were to make a jump into this top five slot, I think Red Bull's chances of winning Constructors' Cup is pretty much nil, because Sainz and Leclerc are both able to be up there. Ferrari is about 60 points currently behind Red Bull. They can make that delta up real quickly. The 60 points, like, that's not a whole lot to overcome if you got two drivers against one. And that could be in the form of two McLarens versus Red Bull or two Ferraris versus Red Bull. Because even if the two McLarens are competing against the two Ferraris, there's parity there. It cancels out. But if you have one Red Bull that's doing really well and the other one that's slowly starting to just drift away into oblivion, yeah, I definitely see this being a really critical moment for Checo to step it up, or they're in jeopardy of losing any kind of chance of getting a constructor championship. So just kind of resonating with the what you pointed out earlier, Chris, this is probably going to be the turning point in whether or not Checo is gonna. I don't think it's a turning point in terms of Checo leaving or not. I think it's a turning point of how Red Bull is going to respond for the plus 1 year to Checo's contract is going to be based on how he handles the second half of this season. And right now, it's not looking great.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only hope Red Bull has, if Sergio keeps on this track, is for Ferrari, McLaren, and Mercedes to be kind of swapping positions consistently. And, if Max is consistently finishing P1, P2, maybe some P3s in there. But, you know, occasionally it's Ferrari on the podium, occasionally it's McLaren on the podium, occasionally it's Mercedes on the podium. Then maybe Max can still win on his own. but it doesn't look good for Sergio in any case. So we have a triple header, and Sergio has a lot to prove in a short amount of time. But I also think Sergio, not only is he aging, but I think he's a very mental driver. And I think he's in his head. And um, I watched an interview from Christian Horner the other day that basically he realized the moment that he was going to quit driving in F1 was somebody was coming out of the pit lane while he was coming around a turn, and I forget the name of the driver. I wish I did, but that they basically pinned it and had the pedal to the floor and didn't let up around the high speed corner. And Christian was like, I can't do that. Like, my brain, I have to let off just a little bit, like just enough, and I don't have what it takes to trust in the car and the tires and in my ability to basically do something inhuman. And he goes like, if I can't do that, then I'll never be at the top. So,
It's
and
funny.
I
That's how I feel when I see like really confident men approach women at bars, and I'm
think,
like, yeah, like there's just something in me that I just don't have that bone or that gene. So yeah, me and Christian, we get each other on that
yeah,
point. Yeah.
samesies. But yeah, so I think that kind of stuff is constantly going through Sergio's head. Like, if Max Verstappen's your teammate and the guy literally decimates you every weekend, you start doubting your abilities, and then you try to do something you can't do and you end up crashing the car. And so then you don't know where that line is because you want to be better, you want to be faster, but then when you try it, you mess up. And so I think as a mental struggle, Sergio's just stuck in this loop of I don't know what to do. And I think that really hinders him um, when trying to take the car on a level that it's capable of going. He maybe not be able to control it. So I kind of think Sergio, it is what it is. I don't think we're going to see greatness out of Sergio for a while, but who knows? Crazier things have happened.
Yeah.
But Mr. King of the Streets didn't do so hot in Monaco. So
He might if he falls to the domino and he goes somewhere else, that might be another gear that turns and drastically changes the landscape of F1 because he'd still be an asset anywhere else. It's just right now being up against Max and in arguably the best car, it's just yeah, it's just too big of a pill to swallow maybe.
the last thing I'll say, which is what you just said, and it made me think of this. You said he'd still be an asset anywhere else. Is there an effing point to F2 anymore, or even F3? Like, these guys who are winning the series, like I think Ollie Behrman and Antonelli are like P9 and P12 or whatever in the F2 series, and the guys who are P1 and P2 don't even get a look anymore. And so, like, what's the point of the series? I don't know. It's just a place for them to be keeping warm, I guess.
So this is probably the best analogy that I can get from my real life experience. When you go to a 4-year university in the States, and I don't know how it works outside the States, so I'm just going to use, local schools and D1 colleges. As an underclassman, you take courses that are pretty, general in terms of like calculus, chemistry, and they're fairly tough. There's there's a amount of classes that you take between those undergrad classes and like your graduate kind of level, your higher level courses, your upperclassmen kind of courses that are meant essentially to like weed people out.
Yeah.
OChem was one of them. Trust me, anyone that went to a D1 school and was studied STEM, they'll tell you OChem is one of those kinds of courses. Cal 2 is one of those kinds of courses. Their sole purpose is not to, because bro, after you leave those classes, it doesn't really, it's not really required as a medical professional or as an engineer to know those courses. The reason that they're there is to weed out who's going to do the work necessary enough to go into the upperclassmen courses, which could potentially actually be easier than OChem and Cal 2, you know? But they want to have that. So you could be the best student ever, and then if you just don't want to put in the work that it takes to get an A or a B in OChem and Cal 2 and some of these other courses, you'll never see the other side of the barrier. In F1 and F2, I think it's more of like who's going to be able to maintain resources, and by that I mean money, to keep their skin in the game. Because that's going to be more important for our sport, is to make sure that there's a barrier of entry, and that barrier stays very high. You know, like I think that is still old school mentality. Like there's sponsorship money's coming, dollars coming in. I think like the women's series is being used in a very progressive, maybe altruistic way, right? Really being able to insert women talent into the spotlight and doing it in a systemic way. I think that's really great. But I think the male F2 F3 series is essentially a test of who has the money to stay around. Because if you got the money to stay around, we'll bring you up into F1. And if you don't have the money to stay around, then why would we want you anyways?
Right.
You know, because if you got money, you can buy yourself in and stay in, a la Lance Stroll. But if you struggle to get in, a la Esteban Ocon, and you're not performing, like a Lewis Hamilton did, then you're easy to scrap. Like, this is why we're having this conversation about like why does Lance stay around? Because he's got money. Why does Esteban stay around? It's because he has a skill up to a certain point. He's probably even more skillful than Lance. But as soon as that well runs dry and there's no money or resources kind of backing you up, you'll be asked to leave. So I think these series are not maybe indicative of, because what's his face, Nutella boy. I always forget his name from Williams, Latifi.
Oh,
Like,
Nicholas TV.
yeah, like
Latifi.
yeah, he's his dad's like a multi-billionaire or something like that, right? And he was able to do really well in the F2 series, and then just shit the bed in F1. So I just don't think it's a marker of if someone's doing really great in F2 or F3 that they're going to be a shoe in for F1, or if they suck at F2 and F3 that they'd be a bad fit for F1. But I do think these junior series are more like uh, uh, a place where they test out if you have enough resources to just stay around, which is sad. I think it's a sad way to develop a sport, but maybe there's ways to improve it, right? And I think the women's series is a great way to showcase how you can improve an old tradition in ways that could facilitate opportunities for once marginalized people.
Yeah, it's a good analogy, and I just I want F1 to be as good as possible. So I want understand money runs everything, but I want to at least see some really good talent as much as possible across the spectrum. I don't want seven Lance Strolls in the mix and just paid drivers driving around the track for fun with like two or three good guys fighting at the top. I want
Yeah, I think we talked about. I think those days are coming to a halt. Maybe not immediately, but I do see like the level of talent that they're just, because if you just let talent like have just a foot in the door, if you're talented enough, you'll break it wide open. We've seen examples like that, like with Hamilton being the prime example. So
yep.
yeah, and even Charles Leclerc, like he doesn't come from means, right? Like he comes from a relatively like moderate, upbringing, and he's able to crush it. So I think yeah. With that being said, I want to see Ollie Behrman. I want to see Kimi Antonelli. I want to see Liam Lawson. As much as we talked about the guys that are leaving, I really want to see these guys coming in and strut their stuff. So
I mean, there's rumors that Jack Doohan or Mick Schumacher could be taking seats. I think they're both testing for Alpine, and so there's a very strong rumor that Jack Doohan's going to uh, get that Alpine seat, and if not, maybe it goes to Mick. Which is all these things are just going to keep spinning this driver market out of control. So Carlos Sainz is your official order to pick a team very soon. But yeah, we have Austria. We have the second of the triple header coming up, and I'm actually really excited about this one because I don't know if you remember last year our podcast episode for this was titled "Unlimited Track Limits" because people were going off track limits every single lap, and we couldn't even keep track and count of how many times the penalties were coming left and right. So they actually installed gravel traps in certain turns this year. So
I don't think it's going to help.
Well, it's going to help if people crash their cars.
People are still going to go off track, and they're going to be like, "What the fuck? Lewis pushed me off."
Yeah. So, but I like this track. It's a short track. It's fast, a lot of elevation, and I think it's a really good track I want to go watch it live just because of the crazy bowl that it is. Super elevation changes, but I'm excited for it. So hopefully it'll be a really good race.
It's 8 a.m. local time, just enough time to catch a schnitzel in the morning. Yeah. While you watch, we'll give our thorough thoughts on it either Monday or Tuesday. We'll figure that out as it comes. But yeah, I'm looking forward to Austria. I'm looking forward to the doubleheader that we have left in the next 2 weeks. Crazy that the season's still not halfway done yet, but I'm happy for all the F1 content that we're about to get.
Yep, it's going to be a good year. We're eating well right now. So until then, we'll see you. We'll see you right after Austria.
Bye, everybody.
See you. Thank you for listening. Shayem and I would love for you to join the Fan Team Radio community. So please like, subscribe, or follow on your platform of choice, and we'll see you next time.